Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dev Diary, where today we continue working on our Vampire Survivors clone featuring Candy. And last time, the entire attack system was basically rewritten from scratch. The rewrite would provide us with a more stable and easy to use system for not only attacks, but also the upgrade system. The upgrade system also included the addition of several weapons. Clone versions of the Garlic, Pentagram, and a few others help progress our Vampire Survivors clone. In its progress we continue to focus on today, so let's get to the code. First, new enums have been included for the weapons added today, as well as projectile types for said weapons. The first of which is the knife. Much like the other projectile-based weapons we've added, the knife also uses a very similar setup. When activated, the ticker will run through the timer process, creating however many knives needed for the attack. These knives are then spawned in bursts similarly to Vampire Survivors. And last time I mentioned streamlining certain reusable chunks of code, which was the plan. However, as I will get to later, it was not attempted this session. Anyway, moving on to the next weapon, the Clock Lancet. Now this was a fun one. Again, it's based on a timer, however each time the attack resets, an angle variable is updated. And this angle is then used to determine where the next line of Frozen Doom should spawn. Said line would be generated using a collision line list, which works very similarly to other collision-based code. Only instead of damaging enemies, this instead triggered a new event. This new event would switch the enemy to a freeze state, which does a couple of things. It stalls the enemy from moving, colors the sprite blue, and begins a countdown to reset the enemy to a non-frozen state. And to guarantee these lines are only effective for a few frames, an effect time variable was used in both the collision and draw code for said lines. The end result is the clockwork-like freezing effect from Vampire Survivors, sending out periodic freezer-based line shenanigans in 12 distinct directions. I'm not exactly sure how accurate the line is meant to be, but the collision line seemed to do just fine. So next up was the Santa Water. The first function for this weapon is one that generates the destinations for where each puddle is to be placed. These coordinates, plus their starting coordinates and a state value, are all recorded to an array within a DS list. The next function would use that data to bring the attack to life. The first state is the thrown state, so distance and direction based on the coordinates provided are monitored. If/when the bottle's quote-unquote position is near enough to the destination, the coordinates are snapped into place and the state is switched. The second state is the actual splash/puddle/hurt state, and it's here that we once again use the collision circle list method to check for an enemy's collision and hurt events. The ticker then does its thing, ensuring enough necessary water is thrown. And finally, the drawn event is broken down into a switch with two cases. In the thrown state, a bottle is drawn at the corresponding coordinates, and the second draws a circle to reflect the collision circle during the hurt phase. Again, the results were quite similar to Vampire Survivors. While lacking in actual graphics, the functionality seemed pretty on point. So the next weapon up was the Lightning Ring, which has almost the exact same setup as the Santa Water. There are two stages which are controlled via effect timer. Positions for each strike is generated and then used to produce collision rectangles for those entries. I'm actually not sure if the area of effect is a circle or rectangle. Regardless, these states were then drawn to the screen. And before actually attacking, a line would be drawn to represent the lightning cracking into frame. Then, while the collision rectangle is active, a rectangle of similar size is drawn to the screen. Again, this is obviously a placeholder for now. Plus, drawing the rectangle also helps visualize the area of effect per strike. And at the risk of sounding like a broken record at this point, the results, while bare, seem to mirror the attack from Vampire Survivors close enough to move on. The final weapon added this session was the Boomerang Cross. The attack code for this one is arguably the most simple of the bunch. It also uses a new function I'm testing, which streamlines the creation of projectiles. And as for the projectile behavior, we'd have to move over to the projectile object itself for this one. The object has received several new variables, mostly to give it state controls. Another code includes ways to differentiate between the attacks and their behaviors. For example, the cross is spawned in its first state, and during this state a timer runs, and once the timer ends, the cross's direction shifts to have the projectile return to the player, thus creating the boomerang-like effect. Now, this one definitely feels like it could use some work. While it gets the basics done, it just doesn't feel quite like the cross does in Vampire Survivors. Also, it was mentioned in the comments in a previous video that there were some extra rules attached to certain weapons like the cross. However, I was unable to find these details online, so if there are better resources for weapon data outside of the wiki, please let me know in the comments. Anyway, that was all the time I had for the additions this session. Now, as I mentioned before, streamlining a lot of this code would be ideal. You may have noticed just how many certain blocks of code are used in multiple weapons, like unchanged. The problem with implementing a general function is going to require each attack be able to reference itself within the weapons list. So while the actual implementation is as simple as adding a reference and then creating the functions, it was going to take some time to set up. The time I just did not have this session. So it's on the to-do list, and it should really make the addition of new weapons from here on out a lot easier and less repetitive. The projectile creation code already works universally, so the future is bright for this one. But it'll have to wait until next time because this brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary. So if you enjoyed today's entry, consider leaving a like. Be sure to also subscribe and hit that bell if you haven't already, and let me know how you're feeling about today's progress. Did I overlook anything important? Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.